And there's intimacy on the radio, and there's naturalness on the radio that can never be replicated on TV. The marvelous resurgence of radio as a political force in this country.
News-related radio programming is evolving.
There's a huge hole in our dialogue that can be filled by the synthesis of traditional radio and a live internet stream. You're about to experience Cowboy State Politics Live. Here we go. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to another incredible installment of Cowboy State Politics Live. From very high above all the bombastic twits in the Wyoming mainstream media, this is Cowboy State Politics. Now, I, of course, am your illustrious host, David Iverson, firmly and permanently ensconced, this time behind the travel microphone, broadcasting to you from the base of the Tetons in the People's Republic of Jackson. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the program. Happy Wednesday. If you're watching on the Ditto Cam, you can obviously see that I'm broadcasting from another location, an unannounced and unknown location in Jackson, because if it were known where I was at, I would have some neighbor yelling at me from the middle of the street trying to videotape everything that's going on. But that is another story, my friends. That's right, I did travel to Jackson for a meeting. Now, I can't tell you what it was about or what it was for. Maybe sometime in the future I'll be able to. But yeah, right now I'm sitting in a very nice place and able to look out at the Tetons. I've come to like coming to Jackson. I've met a lot of nice people here, and there are some things happening. I was told last night that the Teton County GOP really has been taken over by conservatives. That's absolutely a good thing. It hasn't happened in here for a very long time. So I'm excited to see what's going to happen here. And, maybe in the coming days and weeks, perhaps I'll be able to fill you in on this little trip to Jackson and why I was here. Now, let me just kind of give you a roadmap of where we're going on the program this morning. There's been a lot of stuff that's come out about Kamala Harris. Perhaps you've heard about it in the news, but I've got a great article from Red State. It would appear that Kamala Harris is, she's friends with Reed Reisner, or at least she ought to be, or at least she's acting like it. Because she's kind of doing the exact same thing. So anyway, we're going to go to that article. But for today's program, it's going to be kind of cut short. We're going to do about 30 minutes. And the reason why is I've got to get back on the road and head back to out of the People's Republic and back to Northeast Wyoming. So we'll do about 30 minutes. And then tomorrow, I'll be back at it for the full hour. I just didn't want to leave you hanging while I was out traveling. And so, we're live here in Jackson. So let's begin with that piece from Red State, and it's entitled, Kamala Harris Using Soros-Funded Fake News Sites to Lie to Voters. Now, I know, she should have just taken lessons from Reed Reisner, but apparently she was unable to. Let me just quote the first opening paragraphs to you. And I quote, "Surprise, surprise, surprise. Kamala Harris is using a network of fake news sites to help prop up her campaign and mislead voters about her level of support." On Monday, the official Kamala HQ account posted a headline that read, "Polish Pennsylvanians endorse Kamala Harris over Putin. Ukraine concerns." The source was a supposed news outlet named the Keystone Newsroom. The only problem is that the Keystone Newsroom doesn't really exist. Now, what the Harris campaign was trying to do is very clear. Local news outlets are typically more trusted than national outlets by the residents of a given state. By pushing a headline bragging about the major endorsement, quote, from the Keystone Newsroom, An air of credibility is given to the claim. The truth of the matter is far more insidious, though. Greg Price, who you should remember him, and if you don't, he's retweeted a couple stories from Cowboy State Politics without attribution, so we don't necessarily think that he's a good guy. But he has retweeted a couple of Cowboy State Politics stories. Anyway, Greg Price did some digging and figured out how the money is flowing and who is coordinating with whom. From Greg Price's tweet, quote, Kamala's campaign is using fake news headlines from a liberal dark money-funded organization that does political work on behalf of Democrats by operating phony news outlets. Here's how Soros-funded campaign moves in real time. And then there's the article of where are the pieces that Greg Price found. Now, the game being played is pretty easy. In Wyoming, we would all know it because this is the exact game that Reed Reisner was trying to play. He tried to lead people to believe that he had been endorsed by people that he hadn't been endorsed by. The first example of that was President Trump. He put up, remember that whole graphic where there's a picture of him and Trump, and in big letters it says endorsed. But when you read the fine print of the post, you came to find out that it was Reed Reisner who was endorsing President Trump. But that's not how people were led to believe. There were a number of people across the state that Reisner did that to. Most notably, John Baer, Harriet Hageman. He made several posts about Representative Hageman. And then he, of course, stole the logo from Cowboy State Politics and tried to use that to garner support from Cowboy State Politics listeners. So this is not something that's new with what I will call slimy politicians, because that's a pretty slimy move to claim that you're being endorsed by somebody who you really aren't endorsed by. But anyway, back to the article from Red State. The game being played is simple. The Soros-funded Courier newsroom starts a bunch of local news sites that are presented as completely unbiased and nonpartisan. These dark money sites then publish positive headlines about Kamala Harris based on objectively false claims. In this case, the headline states that, quote, Polish Pennsylvanians, a community of nearly 800,000 people, have endorsed her. The truth is that the endorsement was just a letter by 4 Democrat politicians at that point. And the only thing left is for the Harris official campaign account to share the headline and pretend that it's a big giant win, when, of course, it isn't. Is what they're doing illegal? Well, no. The freedom of speech protects even liars, which, I mean, that's what Kamala Harris is, and Reed Reisner for that matter. But they're absolutely protected, and it's not illegal to lie to people. But it's incredibly dishonest and unethical, and it shows just how astroturfed Harris's presidential run is. From the very beginning, everything undergirding her campaign has been fake. Fake glowing proclamations of joy from the mainstream media to the idea that she won an open primary as proclaimed by Nancy Pelosi. Kamala Harris has not won a single primary. In fact, in the 2020 election, she dropped out before the Iowa caucuses. She replaced Joe Biden on the ticket without having won a single primary or a single person actually voting for Kamala Harris. So everything about the Kamala Harris campaign really is fake. There's nothing to it, and as Greg Price and Red State note, it's completely astroturfed. Now, so what does this say about Harris's confidence level as we enter the home stretch of this election? It certainly doesn't project confidence. A campaign that believes it's winning going away doesn't have to use fake news sites to promote false headlines about made-up endorsements. But yet, that's exactly what Kamala Harris is doing. I'd also ask where the mainstream press is. CNN, The Times, PMS, NBC are obsessed with misinformation, but they've got nothing to say when the Harris campaign is the one pushing it. So why, you might ask? Well, it's almost as if their push to censor free speech under the guise of protecting democracy is all nonsense. Now, of course, they wouldn't do that. Of course, they wouldn't push fake news on you. Oh, wait, they would. The only misinformation that they're accusing people of comes from the right. And of course, the Democrats aren't going to tell you when it's one of their own who's absolutely lying, which evidently is Kamala Harris. No joke about it. Now, there's another news outlet that I don't quote all that often because I don't find them really credible at all. They're really the TMZ of the news world, and they're way left-leaning, and that's a site called Axios. Anytime you want a liberal perspective on anything, just go to Axios and you'll get it. But they have a very, very interesting article this morning, and it's entitled Kamala Harris on the Issues in Under 500 Words, which is way more than Kamala Harris has really uttered to the press. But here we go. Key facts according to Axios. Her current position is she's a California senator, and she's only served 2 years in doing that. A key stance on issues. And this is where it should tell you everything you need to know about Kamala Harris. And the reason I chose to go with this article and this source this morning is because it is a left-leaning site. So if you're talking about Democrats and you have a left-leaning site being very critical, or in their case, they don't think they're being critical. They think they're actually reporting on good things. But if you want a credible left-wing source, let's go with Axios. So here is her stance on key issues as reported by the left-wing version of TMZ. And I quote, the Green New Deal, she's a co-sponsor. Medicare for All, she co-sponsored that one with Bernie Sanders. On drug prices, she'd allow the Department of Health and Human Services to determine a fair price for drugs meeting certain conditions. Or in other words, Kamala Harris is absolutely in favor of price fixing. Marijuana legalization. She proposed federal legalization of marijuana and, by the way, they don't mention this, but the legalization of recreational use of all drugs, or at least she said that in her previous presidential run. Teacher pay. She has a plan to give the average teacher a $13,500 salary increase, costing an estimated $315 billion over 10 years. So in other words, and you've heard this from, and we've seen this from a lot of what Kamala Harris has said. During the debate, she said, we're going to give a $25,000 tax break to new homeowners. That's money printing. And then there was all sorts of other spending that she proposed during the debate. All of it is just about printing money. None of it is about actually solving a problem. And this is just another example of that. On taxes, Kamala Harris introduced the Lift the Middle Class Act, which Vox's Dylan Matthews explained as an expansion of the Earned Income Tax Credit. She also proposed offering tax credits to help people pay the rent. So not only are you getting tax breaks for just about everything, we're printing money and giving you tens of thousands of dollars to buy a home that you probably can't afford anyway. Now we're going to give out free money, no money is free when it comes to the government, it's our money, but we're going to be giving money to people so that they can pay the rent. Absolutely ridiculous. On abortion, she proposed requiring states that restrict abortion access to clear new reproductive health laws with the DOJ. Now, everybody should know that Kamala Harris is absolutely in favor of a nationwide abortion legalization bill. In fact, as I was coming over to Jackson yesterday, of course, I was listening to my Sirius XM radio, and it was all about how Kamala Harris wants to do away with the filibuster in order to enact abortion legislation. Just quickly about that. If you do away with the filibuster, it will effectively spell the end of the republic. Now, I know that sounds to be, a crazy right-wing theory, but think about it this way. It is the filibuster that forces the Senate to work together, that they can't pass any legislation until they get a 60-vote threshold, which means that the Republicans and the Democrats are going to have to work together. If they don't have 60 votes, well, then whatever piece of legislation they're talking about doesn't move forward. And, it's that one thing that forces these jokers to work together. you do away with that, then the Democrats or the Republicans will be able to force any piece of legislation through that they want. And it's going to spell the end of any sort of deliberation in that body, because whomever's in power will be able to shove anything they want down our throat. It's extraordinarily dangerous. And just think about all the things that it would allow to happen. If you want a nationwide abortion ban, if you got 51 votes, you're good to go. If you want universal basic income, if you just want everybody to be paid for existing, well, then you just push it through with your 51 votes. It's really super, super dangerous. All right, so let's continue with the Axios article. Sex work. Kamala Harris supports decriminalizing prostitution, the death penalty. She proposes ending and has previously called for a national moratorium on the death penalty. So in other words, it doesn't matter what the 10th Amendment says, and it doesn't matter what any of the states say. Nope, just national ban, and we'll just tell you what to do. Now, here's the big one that we've kind of been covering pretty heavily on the program: guns. Kamala Harris has proposed a ban on importing AR-15 style assault weapons. She suggested executive orders requiring background checks, closing the boyfriend loophole, and allowing victims to hold gun manufacturers responsible. She also supports mandatory buybacks on assault weapons. Now, let's break all that down really quick. A ban on importing AR-15 style weapons. Most AR-15s are constructed right here in America. Most of the people that I know buy their parts and they put them together. So the truth, what she's really banning is any sort of materials that are used to construct an AR-15 style weapon. But secondly, the federal government doesn't have any business banning any type of firearm. Whether it be an AR-15, a 12-gauge shotgun, or an A1, or an M1A1, or anything like that. The government doesn't have any business restricting the Second Amendment at all. So she has suggested executive orders requiring background checks. Hey, I've got news for you. That's actually the law right now. To purchase any firearm, you have to have a background check, and the only way that you don't have to use a background check is if you buy it from a private party, which, of course, the government can't regulate. Closing the boyfriend loophole. There is no loophole with, and they changed the names with this whole loophole business, all along the way. So it was the gun show loophole. Now it's the boyfriend loophole, which that's already against the law. It's called a straw purchase. So the boyfriend loophole, and what they're claiming is that, if we're together, I buy a gun for the girlfriend, or I buy a gun for the wife, which I guess the wife wouldn't, that one wouldn't qualify, but it's essentially a straw purchase. And that's already against the law. If you utter that you are purchasing a firearm for somebody else to an FFL dealer, if they are at all reputable, they're going to tell you no, and they're going to deny the purchase. Allowing victims to hold gun manufacturers responsible, allowing lawsuits against gun manufacturers. This is absolutely outrageous, my friends. This will spell the end for gun manufacturing in the United States. This is just as ridiculous as being able to sue a car company because someone drove drunk. I mean, that's how far removed this is. But that's one of the things that Kamala Harris supports. Mandatory buybacks of assault weapons. Essentially, what that means, my friends, is she wants to steal your guns, to grab your guns, to ban you from having, to confiscate your firearms. That's what that one's about. And this Axios article is openly admitting it. Let's see here. Income inequality. She proposes investing $100 billion in black home ownership to close the racial inequality gap. This is a backdoor attempt at reparations. Kamala Harris is on record saying that she's absolutely in favor of reparations. This is just a backdoor attempt to do it. Domestic terrorism. She would create a federal red flag law and background checks. Well, that's fantastic. The only thing that she needs for for the government to be able to take your guns is for your neighbor to say, you know, that Dave character, he's pretty dangerous, and I think he's really going to hurt somebody. Boom, gun confiscation. The climate. Now, of course, Kamala Harris thinks that climate change is a thing, and according to Axios, she wants a new climate pollution fee on industry. Cap and trade is what that one is. She wants to pass her Climate Equity Act. In other words, that will effectively do away with fossil fuels. Let's see here. What else? Student debt. Here we go. This is a favorite with the Biden administration. Proposes a student loan forgiveness for those making less than $100,000 a year. Free community college, making attending university debt-free and interest-free student loans. More money printing and giving away money. And so, I mean, this is a list that is put out by a left-wing organization that admits to all of the very liberal policies that Kamala Harris is in favor of. Now, compare this to what she has said in her very few public appearances. Remember, she said, well, I'm not in favor of banning fracking, when she absolutely is. I'm not in favor of confiscating your guns, which she absolutely is. There's a huge long list of things that Kamala Harris has changed her position on, but in the end, as she said in the debate, I've not changed my values. Well, this Axios article is a list of the things that she hasn't changed her opinion on. And my friends, it's not going to change. If Kamala Harris gets elected, all of those things that I just mentioned are going to come to pass. And my friends, it will be, I'm kind of a fan of some of these dystopian movies. I don't really care for the zombie movies, but, Apocalypse or something like that. One of my favorite ones, and it's a series from a long time ago, Jericho. There's a couple of nukes that go off, and it's about a community trying to survive. Well, according to Newsweek, and Newsweek of all magazines, very, very left-wing, they have a piece out this morning. Actually, let's see here. It was published yesterday. Americans prepared to cut spending if Kamala Harris wins the election. Now, why would they do that? Well, because if Kamala Harris wins the election, it's going to cost you a heck of a lot more money to just simply live. To the article, and I quote, Americans are preparing to reel in their spending if Vice President Kamala Harris becomes the president, according to a new poll. In a survey from Coupon Cabin, and I don't even know what Coupon Cabin is, but that's where the poll's coming from. A majority of Americans said they will decrease their spending in some way if Harris wins the upcoming presidential election. Roughly 38% said they would decrease spending significantly, cutting back on most non-essential items, while 18% said they would ease spending on luxury or discretionary items. That was compared to just 24% and 10% respectively, who said they plan to cut spending either significantly or moderately if former President Donald Trump wins the election. Kevin Thompson, a finance expert and founder and CEO of 9i Capital Group, attributed the survey results to a recency bias, as many Americans feel President Joe Biden's administration is responsible for inflation. First of all, nobody should feel that they are responsible for inflation. Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are responsible for all of the inflation that we're all living through right now. Quote from this Kevin Thompson guy, as we all know, Biden nor Kamala Harris had anything to do with the inflationary pressures, and the United States actually fared much better than the rest of its global compatriots. That, my friends, is a giant load of bullcrap. Everything that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have done has contributed to all of the inflationary pressures that we are now experiencing. Make no mistake, my friends, it is the current administration that is absolutely responsible for all of the inflation that we have all been experiencing. Now, quickly, and I suppose if we read the rest of this Newsweek article, they would say that inflation is just a matter of increased prices. Quickly, let me explain why that's a load of horse hockey. Malarkey, as Joe Biden would call it. Inflation, literally explained, literally defined, is too many dollars chasing too few of goods. How do you get more dollars than you need? Well, you have to print them. And all of this stimulus money, all of this spending, the Green New Deal, the climate spending, the student loans, everything that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have been spending your money on has been printed. So what about too few of goods? Well, one of two things happens. Either A, manufacturing remains stagnant. That is, companies don't produce any more goods than they did the year before. Or B, manufacturing actually decreases because it costs more money for companies to continue to operate. They produce less and charge more. Ergo, increased prices. But all of it gets traced right back to Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. There is absolutely nothing they can do to get out of it. It doesn't matter how much they try. It doesn't matter how many news outlets or Newsweek articles are printed. Kamala Harris and Joe Biden own the inflation problem. Now, there was another. Remember, we started out with these fake news sites and what Kamala Harris was claiming was an investment. Well, I want to point your attention to an article on The Blaze that talks about George Soros buying 200 plus radio stations. Now, why would he do that? Well, because Americans are pretty adept at spotting fake news. There was just an article in Red State. We started the program with this. Well, if George Soros or some other liberal outfit buys over 200 radio stations nationwide, they no longer have to create fake news sites. They have ones that are already established. All they have to do is cause them to make a hard left turn, which is easy enough because most media outlets are left-wing anyway. But from The Blaze, the article is entitled Foreign Collusion. FCC moves with unprecedented speed to approve Soros's capture of 200 plus radio stations with foreign cash just before the election. And we've only got a couple of minutes left in the broadcast, but let me just read a couple of opening paragraphs to you. And I quote, leftist billionaire and Democratic megadonor George Soros has been leaning on the Democrat-controlled Federal Communications Commission for months in hopes of fast-tracking the group's acquisition of over 200 radio stations in over 40 markets, including stations that run shows from Glenn Beck, Mark Levin, Eric Erickson, Sean Hannity, and Dana Lash. On Wednesday, the FCC reportedly adopted an order to approve the purchase, meaning that in a matter of days, Soros will likely take control of communications of over 165 million Americans with the help of unvetted foreign investors who Democrats have spared from the FCC's customary national security review process. Nationally syndicated radio host and Blaze Media co-founder Glenn Beck asked Trump-appointed FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr Tuesday about the commissioner's apparent willingness to co-sign Soros's latest play for narrative dominance. Carr made it clear that, quote, it's an unprecedented decision for the commission that would not have alternatively been accepted were Soros a partisan or another stripe, a decision that comes amid a broader weaponization of government power against free speech. Now, just some background on this. Odyssey filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in Texas on January 7th to reduce its debt. Months later, the U.S. Bankruptcy Court for the Southern District of Texas approved the company's reorganization plan, paving the way for an equitization of over 80% of the company's debt. Guess who snapped all of that up? George Soros, my friends, and he did it 165 times over. There have been a lot of media outlets that have been purchased as of late. Now, what could they do with all of that? No doubt there is already the infrastructure in place to utilize those media outlets. So, with 42 days left in the election, there's plenty of propagandizing that can happen. So just keep your ears peeled, trust but verify, use your own sources, my friends, and make sure that you know who you're talking to. Well, we've come to the end of our busy broadcast half hour on the program. Again, I'm broadcasting from Jackson, Wyoming this morning, and I'm getting ready to get back on the road so I can return to the Cowboy State Politics studio. But for now, from the base of the Tetons in the People's Republic of Jackson, I'm David Iverson, and this is the one and only Cowboy State Politics.